Christine Holgate never resigned. Don't tell lies to her.
Some scorched land, wide and free.
Are we just going to continue with them screwing the farmers down through the floor? But I ain't spending any time on it.
Don't keep interrupting me. You hear me? Don't keep interrupting me. I have a royal cattle.
Welcome everybody to another episode of Wisdom Mongrel Patriot. I'm here with Bob Catter and we're going to discuss some of the legislation that's been in the House this week. It's been a bit of a crazy week, back after the winter break. Some of the interesting legislation that we've got, Bob, got an administrative judicial review legislation amendment bill, which is actually trying to strengthen the ability for the judiciary to stop the perpetual applications that are made by migration and protection visa holders when they've exhausted all avenues. They want to draw a line in the sand.
That battle needs to be done. It's good the government's trying to do something about it. That's an absolutely appalling problem. Basically, if a person wants to get in Australia, they can. And that's wrong. I nearly died of shock when I found out that there's over 450,000 people here coming in on average on student visas, and only about 40,000 are leaving.
Yep.
So, don't worry about the immigration visas, which they concentrate all the time. But take a handle on this. This scares the hell out of me. They are bringing almost a million people a year.
It seems crazy that government's saying that we only have 300,000 migrants a year. But yet when you look at the arrival and departure figures, and surely that cancels out the tourists and the people that come in and out. I think there's 22.8 million a year that are coming in and 21.5 that are leaving. So that's a shortfall of 1,300,000 people that are staying in Australia. because surely the ins and outs cancel each other out for those that are genuinely tourists.
There's about 6 or 7 million of those people here now. In another 10 years, they'll be a majority in our country. What sort of a country buries itself in a flood of migration, many of whom are coming from countries, and I repeat, without apology, no democracy, no rule of law, no Christianity, no industrial awards? Then why the hell are they being brought into this country? And I use the word bought rather than coming to this country. And many of them are from the Middle East and North Africa, and they are being farmed into key areas in Sydney and Melbourne, where there's no industry, there's no jobs, and there's no accommodation. No jobs, no accommodation. Then what the hell are you bringing them into Australia for? And I'll tell you why. Because you're farming them into key electorates in Sydney and Melbourne.
Yep, and I think something does need to be done because the student visa system, the universities have become addicted to the funding that's created through the student visa system. The student visa system allows for family dependents to come overseas and guarantees them automatic work rights as well.
Just while you said that, I just want to hone in on that if you don't mind, please. The chairman of the Universities Council of Australia, so all the universities in Australia belong to the University Council, and this is about 25 years ago actually, he said, if you stop the student visas, then you will close half the universities in Australia. So I said, what you're saying is they're visa shops. They're not centres of learning and education. He said, that's exactly what I'm saying. So there's a chairman, the head of the Universities Council, as it was then called, in Australia, maybe 25 years ago. It's much worse now, the situation, than then, saying that. Now, I terribly Jockey Peterson era, we never sacked anyone. We never removed a job. Some people sacked themselves in a strike, but that's not our business. That was theirs. But we didn't sack anyone. So I hate sacking people. I hate, so if we're going to do that at the universities, then you've got to put in about $60 or $70 billion a year into doing what universities should be doing, which is research. Yeah. Whether it's the area of public welfare or whether it's the area of advanced medical science, there should be a lot more serious money going there. And it's an area in which Australia's been particularly good, actually.
Yep. So, look, it is good that government is doing something about this, but I think it's a very, very minute change when a whole system needs to be reworked. So,
It's a political press release change.
Yep.
It's not actually a change.
In our beer rating system, I'd probably give it half a beer out of 10. Yep. Moving on to the next, probably 3 beers out of 10 is they're making changes to the anti-money laundering and counter-terrorism funding a bill. And interestingly enough, this basically amends our terrorism financing provisions to explicitly criminalise the funding of declared state sponsors of terrorism. Now, is it not shocking to you that there is already not legislation that actually stops the state funding of terrorism? And I think this goes to what's happening in Melbourne with the firebombing of the tobacconists, with now they're entering into the alcohol market. I think that there are some extremely powerful and scary people that are behind both of those.
There's no one monitoring or seems to take responsibility for what's going on in Australia.
It does seem like Australia has taxed the prices of cigarettes so significantly and restricted vapes and taxed alcohol so significantly that they've actually allowed for this infiltration of this huge black market. And it is exceedingly scary. I think I saw a statistic, and please don't quote me on this, but something like 80% of all tobacco sales in Australia are black market tobacco sales because the taxes that they put on Australian tobacco sales are just so phenomenal that they're all black market. So instead of us giving money for our roads and rails and hospitals and all of those arguments that they put forward we need to tax so that we can fund our health system, that is going to overseas terrorists by the sounds of it, allegedly.
Well, the Bin Laden family were very close, and I think they may have been related to the Saudi royal family. The Bin Ladens would be amongst the richest people on earth, and there was no doubt that Osama bin Laden was getting access to some of that money. Now, from what I've been told, the Bin Ladens in Saudi Arabia are very, very good people. The Saudi royal family are very, very good people. But there's black sheep in everyone's family, that's for sure. And in this case, that money was being siphoned off, no doubt about it. So when you say there's money being siphoned off, I don't doubt that for a moment. And in fact, I'd be surprised if it wasn't. There's a funny little old bloke that was in partnership with my wife in house repairs and buying and reselling. But he couldn't read or write, but he's very intelligent. But he's long since dead, so I can talk about him. But as soon as he said, I went down to the shed where a lot of our stuff's kept, and she said, there's all marijuana there. I said, it's not marijuana. It's illegal tobacco. He comes from Mareeba, which is one of the two biggest tobacco growing centres in Australia, when they virtually banned. It was banned legally, but it wasn't banned illegally. And he was smoking plenty out of it. Yeah.
So look, I think this legislation's good. You know, three beers for trying to stop the terrorism financing, but they're not getting to the root cause of the issue. And I'd probably argue that the Australian taxation system, particularly the taxes on tobacco and on alcohol, are actually allowing a black market to thrive. So the next item of legislation is the Biosecurity Amendment Improving Operational Efficiency Bill. Now, that pretty much basically replaces the traditional passenger-based incoming boarding passenger card with a electronic system. And their main justification for it is to safeguard Australia's $110 billion agricultural sector. Now, I find it laughable that they think that changing from a paper-based system to a digital-based system of passengers filling out cards can deal with protect Australia's agricultural sector when they are actively pursuing import applications to bring in Filipino bananas, to bring in pomelos from overseas, to bring in peanuts that actually will variegate in Australia, to bring in mangosteens. You know, time and time again, we've had shipping containers that are filled with pest and diseases brought into our shore under the mantra of free trade. And yet they're spending millions protecting Australia's agriculture by changing passenger boarding cards. It just seems very short-sighted that if they really genuinely wanted to protect Australia's $110 billion agricultural sector, maybe they should stop importing giant shiploads of fruit and vegetables from overseas.
Well, I mean, your family, a farming family, one of the bigger farming families in North Queensland, you would be well aware that black Sikatoka would have wiped out the banana industry in Northern Australia. And the extreme measures to try and control it have put pretty close to 300 hectares. No one can walk on or off that 300 hectares. It is evil ground because the ground contains black Sikatoka, and we can't take the risk of it spreading. And, you know, if you say, bring the bananas in from the poor Filipino workers, well, no, the money's not going to go to the benefit's not going to go to the poor Filipino workers. It's going to be to the rich plutocrats that live in Manila, that own all the farms in the Philippines. And I might add most of them are Chinese. So you're not helping the workers in the Philippines. In fact, you're making their situation worse because the plutocratic owners of all the farms in the Philippines are now so much wealthier than they were before. And they will convince, of course, the Filipino people it's been good for the Philippines. No, it hasn't. It's been good for a few plutocratic farmers.
There's significantly documented child labour issues over there. There's very minimal wages.
Good call.
The environment,
child labour, good call.
The pesticides and the herbicides and the weedicides that they use have damaged a lot of their waterways. They don't have anywhere near the environmental regulations that we have in Australia. So I really think that if we want to be global citizens, then we really need to fair dinkum be global citizens. So that again probably gets half a schooner. The next bill may give you some cause for mild excitement. There is a cash distribution framework bill, which the object of the bill is to secure continuous nationwide public access to physical cash services. Now, that is something that is desperately required. I don't feel that this legislation goes as far as what the UK legislation does, because the UK legislation actually makes the banks really responsible for scams and push payment scams.
Well, yeah, but it's not that. If you do not ensure by legislation the use of cash, then if you want to buy a loaf of bread, you have to get permission from your bank. So if you want to put your right to buy a loaf of bread in the hands of some foreign and Melbourne and Sydney-based bankers, well, you can, but I don't. Under no circumstances do I want us to lose the power of the right to means of exchange to buy a loaf of bread. And if you move to a cashless society, which undoubtedly the banks are pushing for, let me give you a good example of that. One of the great heroes of modern Australia is a lady called Christine Holgate. Christine was head of Australia Post. She wouldn't sack anyone because she believed they were her employees. She was going to look after them. She wouldn't close a single post office in Australia because she believed that responsibility as service to the public. But her mortal sin, for which the powers that be, the ALP and the LNP, were determined to sack her, was because she wanted Australia Post to be a people's own bank, that we had the right to create money. We, the Australian people, had the right to create money instead of a little coteria of powerful people that run the banks in Sydney and Melbourne and pay themselves $2 or $3 million a year in salaries. That was why she was a superhero, and that was why they were determined to destroy her. Yep. They're having another go at her now, actually. But a courageous and great lady, no question, and one of the heroes of modern Australia. Now, we've got to pick up the sword that she was forced to give up and fight for a people's own bank. We had the good old days of the Country Party. We had 4 people's own banks in Queensland. The Ag Bank, I can't remember the name of it, the State Bank, and the Development Bank, which I was responsible for 2 of those banks. But the people of Queensland had the right to issue money. Banking loan issues money. But now we have been conned and dragooned into giving that power to a little coteria of people that pay themselves $2, $3, $4 million a year.
So it's applauded. It's applauded that they're looking
in
at
Sydney
providing.
in Sydney and Melbourne.
So it is applauded that they're providing access to physical cash services. But if we've got blanks closing down, and if we've got no means of actually accessing our cash, it's kind of a bit of a mess.
And that is the necessity for state banks, and that is why the Country Party governments in Queensland, Jockey Peterson was our last premier of the Country Party. Why we had 3, arguably 4 banks that were owned by the people of Queensland. And, when the banks hit the panic button, the notorious case, Charlie Follott case, which dominated the media in Australia for a period of 2 years, and we ensured that it would dominate the media in Australia. 2 of the great commentators, which were listened to by every Australian at the time in radio, they both came out very powerfully on the Charlie Follott case. But he kept his payments up and his interest payments up to the bank, meaning an on time, every single payment. But their debt to asset value ratio didn't suit the banks, So in spite of the fact that he'd kept his side of the contract, they breached
Yeah.
their side of the contract and reduced him to a penniless pensioner. When the rule of law would dictate, but Charlie didn't have the cash to fight, the giant banks of Australia.
Yeah.
But the little people, the ordinary people, rose up in their righteous anger, and Charlie got his station back.
Yeah. So this, providing access to cash, 5 out of 10, because it gets you halfway there. But there's no use of guaranteeing access if you have no banks available by which you can get the cash from. So the next one that we've got is interactive gambling. So they're doing some more gambling reform. They're basically trying to limit commercial advertising and aiming to restrict the children's exposure to gambling. And I just wonder if this is, we've got to be able to have some self-responsibility. Where is the freedom? Where is the freedom and fun? That are they taking away,
when I was writing my history book, I had menage, I think is the right word, of photographs from the Second World War. I doubt whether there was a single photograph where one or more of the soldiers didn't have a durry in his hand. It was a symbol of Australia, having the old seat, hanging out your mouth. In a lot of cases, they weren't even lit, they just had the comfort of, but when the Labor Party got elected, I was screaming out across the house, "You're a bunch of Puritans. You don't want anyone to have any fun. You want to enforce your idea of morality upon people, whether they like it or whether they don't." And the Puritans were very powerful. And Pym and who was the leader of the revolution, Bill of Rights, the Puritan leader. Yes, he's notorious in history. His name will come to me in a moment. But he became the dictator of England. He cut the head off Charles I. It was terrible, I can't remember. But anyway, the first thing the Puritans did when they got control was to ban Christmas. I mean, they were Christian, they were an extreme Christian sect, and they wanted to impose their beliefs and, I've got to say, their form of Christianity upon the rest of the country. Well, the rest of the country, their form of Christianity is, we celebrate and have fun and enjoy ourselves at Christmas. You shouldn't be, doing these frivolous things on.
Yes.
And the Roundheads would gallop on the horses into houses with their horses and spear the Christmas cake off the table with their swords. I mean, but Pym and isn't that terrible? I can't think of his name. You should know it, Elise. When they died, they weren't going to do this, rise up against them when they were alive. When they died, they dug their cadavers, their skeletons, up out of the ground and tore them to pieces in the main streets of London or the city in which they were buried. They hated them so much.
And I suppose that goes...
Cromwell.
Yes.
Pym and
yes.
Cromwell.
Oh, yes.
Cromwell.
But
they dug them up, torn to pieces. There's no precedent for that in human history, but the level of hatred against those, people that just hated us having a good time.
But like the significant taxes on cigarettes and alcohol, are we just sending our money? Like, are we actually stopping people from gambling, or are we just creating this overseas market where all of the money just goes overseas to unaccountable betting syndicates? And people like to have a beer and a punt. If we have a regulated market that allows you to have a beer and a punt in a controlled way, but still allows you to have that freedom and fun, then, surely, there needs to be some recognition of the fact that people might still gamble. People will find a way to do these things. But their money, instead of going into the pockets of Australians and, programs like BetStop, will go to overseas syndicates.
Well, I come from a little tiny bush town, Cloncurry, and family went out there in a Cobb and Co. coach in the late 1880s. I would say population was about 2,400 at the time, but there would have been about 500 people that went into Bobby Backash's illegal SP gambling, hall in Cloncurry. They didn't pay enough graft money to the new policeman sergeant in Cloncurry, and so he raided them because they weren't paying him enough graft money. And there were 140, but as luck would have it, the magistrate was out of town, and they had to use 2 JPs. One of the JPs was my father, one of the biggest gamblers in the town, and the other one was a public servant in the magistrate's office who was the second biggest gambler in the town, and they fined them all 2 shillings. And, in my book, my next book, about being a kid in Cloncurry, I said, that was when my father became really famous. Every newspaper in Australia said that my father was the most corrupt mayor in the whole of Australia. He was really famous, and everyone was really proud of him in Cloncurry, because they fined 140 people 2 shillings, and they burst out laughing when they said, "I find this, hey, John Smith, 2 shillings," and they both looked at each other and burst out laughing. But geez, I hate the Puritans. I'm not a gambler. I'm not a drinker. I get on the grog occasion, but I'm not a drinker and I'm not a gambler. But, geez, I love people. Our thing of our political party, Borchoff, that it's be for,
build it, own it, freedom,
reward to those who work, Christianity, our beautiful nature wonderland, enjoy it, have fun in it, and protect it too. But the 2 F's at the end are freedom and fun party. We don't go past some laws restricting people.
Look, I'm no gambler, but some of my most favourite memories of my mad Irish Catholic grandmother were actually tuning into the radio, listening to the GGs, running, putting circles around the 2 each way wager that I was going to take for $1, $2 bets that I was doing, and it was such fun and such brilliant memories.
Yeah, my 2 grandmothers loved to have their little, $5 of a weekend on this or that or the other.
And it was never huge amounts of money, but it was, betting on the GGs was a fabulous way to...
in the country towns where, we had very limited avenues for fun, I suppose. That was one of the major interests of the town.
The GGs and the trots.
Yeah,
it was great. And it just seems disappointing that, kids have got so much access to social media and permanent entertainment, but those more pure forms of entertainment just seem to have gone by gone by the wayside. You can't fish, you can't hunt, you can't shoot, you can't gamble, you can't swing from a tree into the river anymore. You can't actually even go into the river because it's full of crocodiles. You can't water ski. You got noise restrictions. And it does kind of scare me, because in 20 years' time, what are they going to start banning 2-up in Anzac Day? Are they going to stop all of our gorgeous country races that occur? What about the Melbourne Cup, the race that stops a nation? They're active forms of gambling. And how far down the slippery slope do we travel in terms of restricting freedom and fun and people's right to have a punt? Okay, Therapeutic Goods Amendment, medical shortages. They're looking at doing a model to address critical medical shortages.
No, it's good that they're attempting to do something. It won't be very effective, but it's good that they're attempting to do something. Right, but move on, Elise. We've really got to move along here.
Okay. So the University Accord, it's basically providing the Australian Tertiary Education Commission with the ability to cap and distribute international student placement numbers. Now, it is a big fair of mine. I think it's outrageous that a university-based and controlled organisation has been given control over establishing their own student caps, because they own international student caps. So they are giving the universities the power to bring in as many international students as what they want, that I can see from this legislation.
Let me just say that we are now tenaciously determined to stop the student rot. Now, I don't want maybe 100,000 academics in Australia to lose their jobs. That's too big. About 40,000 academics to lose their jobs. Because I quoted earlier in this discussion the head of the Universities Commission for Australia, chairman of the Universities Commission, he was dean of the faculty of the university, and he said, and it was a matter of public record, but he said it to me personally, if you stop, this is 25 years ago, the universities from being visa shops, then you'll close half the universities in Australia. Now, the situation with the visas, like how many people coming in each year under student visas?
Under student visas and
450,000.
associated family-dependent visas.
Yeah.
That you've got to have a student first.
They come in on a student visa, but they can bring their families in.
Yes.
People must understand that. If you get a student visa, you can bring your family in.
And everybody gets working rights.
Right, now I love anecdotes, but I climbed into a taxi in Brisbane, and the bloke's about, I'd say he was in his early 50s in age, He spoke all right English, so he'd obviously been in Australia a long time. But I just said, so mate, what subjects are you doing this year? And he was doing hospitality appreciation. That was the subject he was doing that year. He's 54. He's been doing a subject every year, or maybe the same subject 8 times, and each year for 8 years.
And driving a taxi.
But I didn't ask to say anything. The first thing I said to him was, "What subject are you doing this year, mate?" And he just answered me.
Yeah.
Of course, giving the game away that he's here on a student visa, and he's 54.
So maybe one of the first things that you need to do is take away the family-dependent visas for student visas and take away the working rights.
I reckon take away the student visas. I mean, if you want to reduce that number from 1 million a year, people coming into this country, and it would appear over 400,000 students coming on student visas, they never go home. I actually asked that question of Tony Abbott, who, by the way, had never spoken to me. He's the only politician who never spoke to me, which didn't matter much because he wasn't running the country. Peter Cridlin wasn't. I was very close friends with Peter, so it didn't really matter much. But anyway, I asked him a question, and it really got at him, so he sent the police out to round him up. And the media labelled him a racist. And he did come across as a bit British, for the sake of a better word. He wanted to reintroduce knighthoods. He was gotten rid of 4 weeks after he announced that he was reintroducing knighthoods in Australia, and he was going to give the first knighthood to Charlie or Prince
Philip
Richard,
it was,
or
I think.
Prince, whatever his name was. He was going to give the first knighthood to him, which, it's just so ridiculous that his approval ratings dropped through the floor. But I would love to have seen the look on Peter Cridlin's face when he made that announcement. She would have been. She worked as a stockman for over 2 years out in the bush on a horse.
And look, I think we've probably covered the student visa issue enough, but it does seem quite insane that government is getting more hands off in relation to control of numbers.
92% of the people coming to Australia are going to Sydney and Melbourne. A few of them going to Brisbane. Right? See, there's no jobs for them. There's no accommodation for them. And this is an act of lunacy. No, it's not. There's great logic in this because they're coming from Middle East and North Africa, and they are going into selected Labor electorates or electorates that can be turned into Labor electorates. By the way, the Liberal Party were doing the same thing, nowhere near as effectively, though. Keep going.
The last legislation that I want to bring to your attention is Wine and Other Legislation Amendment Bill. And this basically recognises the issue of global oversupply, but also there is, as I understand it, a significant market in wines from overseas fraudulently claiming that they're Australian wines. So government, bless their cotton stocks, instead of actually dealing with the issue of oversupply or dealing with the issue of food fraud, they're instead doing a data collection exercise where they're basically over-regulating an industry and requiring producers to provide all of this data, which it just seems like they're punishing those who need the most assistance. Like, if Australia is going to continue to be known as a diverse and superior producer of wine, then you can't over-regulate the wine producers. The problem is oversupply. The problem is fraud. The problem isn't a lack of data of what Australian farmers are doing. The problem is what's happening with the overseas.
I've never really been overseas, but I just did a quick ethanol tour into North Dakota, but I got and into Sao Paulo, but I got sick and I was laid up for about a week and I was watching the television. But the thing that struck me though, driving around the place, was yellowtail wines. The big signs up for yellowtail all over. It was Canada, the city in the west of western seaboard of Pacific seaboard of Canada. But the signage for yellowtail wine, and it's the biggest sold, I hate to say cheap wine, but ordinary wine, I'll say, in the world. And of course it's Australian, but I want to, the second biggest wine producer in Australia, but you only get a kilometre of tanks that are like 40 or 50 feet high. It's a huge industry, and brings in a lot of money to Australia. But to try and crucify that industry, it's just another example it's not that the people that run Australia are bad people. It's that they have absolutely no idea what they're doing. And I say it jokingly, but it's not really a joke. I mean, what you have in Canberra is 5 generations of inbreeding. Talented people will not go to Canberra. They will not leave Sydney, Melbourne or rural Australia to go to Canberra. They won't do it. So you've got the children of Canberra children, of Canberra children, 5 generations of inbreeding, cloistered in a city completely cut off from reality.
So with all of this legislation that we've looked at, it seems to be that the overriding theme that government might be okay at identifying what the issue is. It's just absolutely tragically appalling at providing a solution. Just to wrap it all up and end, I think that's what the Australian public is searching for, is out there looking for. They're looking for somebody with a vision or some kind of solution to these issues, and all we're getting is this piecemeal approach. We have a government that seems unwilling, unable to actually really tackle the big issues that are facing Australia, and that's what this legislation is telling me.
6 months before Biosecurity Peterson was stabbed in the back, and with him went Leo Hilscher. And I never figured out whether Leo was running the show, he was a chief public servant, or whether Joe was. And very attractive background, Leo. But the pair of them, but when they came to power, Joe became, and he put Leo in that all-powerful position. But we were a coal importing country when Biosecurity Peterson was elected Premier. They arguably quadrupled agricultural production because they were building a major irrigation scheme, dam and irrigation scheme, every year. They're putting down 1,000 kilometres of rail line every 2 years because they're opening up mines everywhere. To my knowledge, I don't know a single, yes, I know of 2 mining operations that have started since Biosecurity Peterson was stabbed in the back. 2, there may be 20. But we were doing one every year, a major mining development every year. A new mining town every 3 years came into existence. The state went from about 1.5 million people to about 8 million people, under that regime. But, the ALP Theodore governments, not ALP governments, they're really Theodore governments. All right, it was founded with the ALP too, but nothing, or you say ALP, it's nothing remotely resembles the ALP have today. Entirely different class of people. All of them would have worked with their hands, as did Theodore. He was a miner. And easily the most important person in Australian history. I didn't say that. Malcolm Fraser said that. I didn't say that. Keating said that. But I would not agree with Keating or Malcolm Fraser on anything at all. But I do have to say I agree with them on that.
Yeah.
So even Keating and stuff. But that was the sort of person that had the power, was given the power by the people, was that sort of person that had worked with his hands down a mine and had achieved great things. When I say that too, they owned, Ian McCormack owned 3 or 4 mines. They'd worked at developing themselves and everything. So they weren't just employees either. They were blokes that went out there and had a go.
So we've got to continue to fight the fight.
Sorry.
I think on a lighter note, we do have a government that may be aware of the issues, because the legislation this week has actually got quite a number of issues that they just seem to not be providing the solutions that Australia needs. So we need to hammer it home, get them back to the drawing board, get them to start governing for the betterment of Australia.